What if I told you the most famous trade route in history is still alive? Not in the way you think, not with bustling merchants or camels hauling silk across the desert, but in whispers, in ruins, in the shadows of forgotten cities, the Silk Road. We've all heard about it in school, a network of trade routes that connected China to the West. Silk, spices, gold, and stories traveled across it. But so did something else, something strange, something lost, something haunted. Because if you look closely enough, the Silk Road isn't just a path through space, it's a journey through time. And time doesn't forget. Hidden beneath the sand are cities no map shows. There are bones where once there were banquets, and stories so strange they were never meant to be told. This isn't your textbook history. This is the dark side of the Silk Road, the one you won't hear about in museums, the one filled with mystery, myth, and maybe even ghosts. So sit back, and let me take you on a journey across a road that never really disappeared. It just faded from sight. When we hear the Silk Road, we usually picture one long, straight line. A single road cutting across deserts, mountains, and cities. But the truth? It wasn't one road at all. The Silk Road was a massive network, a web of routes stretching over 6,000 kilometers from China to the Mediterranean Sea. It passed through what we now call Iran, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Turkey, and even touched parts of Africa and Europe. And yes, it carried silk, but also spices, jewels, porcelain, horses, glass, tea, paper, and gunpowder. But it wasn't just goods that moved. Ideas traveled here too. Religions, languages, music, diseases, technologies. Imagine this: a Buddhist monk walking from China to India in search of sacred texts, a Persian astronomer sharing his knowledge with Chinese scholars, a merchant bringing spices to Europe and returning with stories of strange lands and gods. The Silk Road wasn't just about trade, it was about connection, a bridge between the East and the West long before the internet or airplanes existed. It made empires rich, it shaped entire civilizations, and it changed how humans saw the world and each other. But there was a cost. Not everything that traveled the Silk Road brought progress. Alongside knowledge came conflict. Alongside trade came plague. And in the cracks between cultures, strange stories began to grow. Stories of cities that vanished without a trace, of travelers who walked into the desert and never came back, of objects that cursed those who touched them. This is where the specters begin, not in ghost stories, but in the gaps, the silences, the mysteries no one can explain. Because if the Silk Road was a bridge, some say it also became a portal to things lost, buried, and forgotten. Imagine walking through a desert. The wind is dry, the air is silent, and suddenly, ruins. Stone walls buried in sand, half-buried statues, wooden beams, still standing after 1,500 years, but no people, no voices, no footsteps, only the sound of dust. Welcome to the ghost towns of the Silk Road. Centuries ago, these places were alive, full of noise, color, and trade. Today, they're nothing but bones in the sand. Let's start with Lulan. Once a thriving oasis city, Lulan sat at the edge of the Lop Nur Desert in what is now western China. It was a key stop for traders, a place to rest, trade, and refuel before facing the desert. But around the 4th century, it vanished. No battles, no fire, just silence. Archaeologists found houses, tools, even a woman's body, perfectly preserved by the dry air. She still had her hair, her clothes, her jewelry. But no one knows why Lulan died. Some say the river that fed it changed course. Others say it was buried by sandstorms. Some believe it was cursed, a place taken back by the desert itself. Then there's Nia. Nicknamed the Pompeii of the Silk Road, Nia was once a kingdom. Yes, a kingdom, with wooden houses, coins, official seals, even court documents carved into wood. Its people? Gone. Today it's just fragments, letters written in ancient scripts, beds turned to splinters, shoes worn by someone who never returned. And these aren't the only ones. There are dozens more. Dandanwilik, Subashi, Meran, each one a city of whispers, each one with its own unanswered questions. Why were they abandoned? Where did the people go? And why does it feel like they were trying to leave in a hurry? Some explorers say the silence of these cities is unsettling, as if they're watching, as if something ancient still lingers there. But here's the strangest part. Locals near these ruins often refuse to go near them. They speak of bad luck, of strange dreams, of people who went exploring and came back different. These cities are more than ruins. They are specters. Not because they're haunted by ghosts, but because they are ghosts. Ghosts of greatness, buried by time and swallowed by the desert. And maybe, just maybe, some things were meant to stay buried. The Silk Road was not just traveled by armies or kings, it was walked by ordinary people, and some extraordinary, merchants carrying spices and silk across burning deserts, monks chasing ancient scriptures hidden in distant temples, mystics searching for truth, visions, or maybe escape. But not everyone who walked the Silk Road made it to the other side. Some vanished into storms, some were taken by bandits, and some just disappeared. Their names are lost, but their stories linger. Take Xuanzang, for example, a Chinese monk in the 7th century who defied the emperor's orders and traveled west, alone, all the way to India, on foot. He crossed freezing mountains, bandit territory, and deadly deserts, in search of Buddhist teachings. When he finally returned 17 years later, he brought back not gold, but knowledge. Over 600 texts and ideas that would change China forever. But not everyone was so lucky. Many monks set out like Xuanzang and never came back. Their paths erased by wind, their voices now only found in letters, half buried in desert sands. Then there were the caravan leaders. They knew the roads, they knew the stars. But even they couldn't predict sandstorms that lasted days, or routes that disappeared overnight. One Persian tale tells of a caravan that entered the Taklamakan desert and was never seen again. All they found, years later, were bells buried in sand, still attached to the bones of camels. And what about the mystics? Wandering holy men, seers, some say magicians. They believed the Silk Road was more than a trade route. They believed it was a spiritual path. There are whispers of men who found ancient scrolls in ruined temples and went mad, of travelers who saw strange lights in the desert and walked toward them, never to return. Could they all be stories? Sure, but the Silk Road was dangerous, no matter who you were. Disease, dehydration, wild animals, human greed. It wasn't just a highway of wealth, it was a test, and not everyone passed. When we think of history, we usually talk about the winners, the emperors, the warriors, the traders who made it rich. But the Silk Road was built on the footsteps of thousands who didn't make it, men and women who risked everything and gave everything, and even though we don't know their names, sometimes on the wind that rolls through the desert, it feels like their voices are still there, waiting to be heard. Every trade route has its treasures, gold, jewels, silk. But the Silk Road had something more. Secrets. In the early 1900s, European explorers began digging through the forgotten cities of Central Asia. What they found wasn't just pottery or coins. They found scrolls, statues, and ancient texts, many hidden in sealed caves, untouched for over 1,000 years. One of the most famous discoveries, the Mogao Caves near Dunhuang, China. Inside was the library cave, sealed shut since the 11th century. When it was opened, they found over 50,000 manuscripts, religious texts, maps, paintings, even the world's oldest printed book. But soon after these treasures were taken out and shipped to Europe, strange things started to happen. Shipments delayed by freak storms, scholars falling ill, museums reporting odd events around the artifacts, objects moving on their own, sudden temperature drops, or staff experiencing vivid nightmares. Coincidence? Maybe. But many locals had warned, these scrolls were protected for a reason. One British explorer, Aurel Stein, famously ignored those warnings. He took thousands of relics from Dunhuang, often in secret. Later in life, he suffered health issues, financial ruin, and died in near obscurity. Some call it karma, others call it the curse of the desert library. And it wasn't just Stein. Other treasure hunters, like Sven Hedin and Langdon Warner, removed artifacts from sacred Buddhist sites and temples. Some of them reported feeling watched while excavating. Some said they were followed by animals behaving strangely. One even claimed to have seen a monk disappear into thin air. Whether or not you believe in curses, one thing is clear. Many of these treasures were never meant to be moved. They weren't just art. They were sacred, ritual objects, protected by chants, symbols, and centuries of silence, and once disturbed, something changed. Today, those relics sit in glass cases in London, Berlin, Tokyo, and Paris. But the stories that followed them, those never left. And some say, neither did the spirits guarding them. Not everything that traveled the Silk Road could be seen. Some things rode along in stories, passed from traveler to traveler like warnings whispered in the dark. Every land the road touched had its own legends, and the further from the cities you went, the stranger they became. Let's start in the deserts of Xinjiang. Local nomads there still speak of the desert wailers, invisible voices that cry out at night, not wind, not animals, but something human and wrong. They say if you follow the sound, you never come back. Your footprints stop, as if the sand swallowed you whole. And then there are the sandwalkers, figures seen just at the edge of vision. Not bandits, not travelers, just standing still until they disappear when you blink. In Uzbekistan, old caravan guards told tales of the jinn of the crossroads, spirits that appear where trade paths intersect, sometimes offering help, sometimes tricking travelers into walking in circles until they die of thirst. And in Tibet, high in the mountains, there's a legend of the silent monk, a figure in red robes said to float just above the ground. He doesn't speak, he doesn't move, but if you meet his gaze, they say, you'll dream of your own death over and over until it becomes real. These aren't modern ghost stories made for clicks. They're ancient, rooted in cultures that lived with the desert, respected its power, and feared what it could hide. Think about it. When you're alone on a vast, empty road for days, when you see strange shapes in the dunes, when the wind sounds like it's whispering your name, wouldn't you believe too? And there's one more story, a whispered legend of a map, not one drawn in ink, but burned into a piece of silk, said to lead to a city that exists outside of time, a place where past, present, and future overlap. But every traveler who's claimed to see it was never seen again. Were these tales just fear and imagination? Maybe. But when so many cultures, so far apart, all speak of spirits on the road, you start to wonder if something deeper was walking those paths alongside them. Not every journey ends with a destination. Some end with a shadow. The Silk Road may be ancient, but its story isn't finished. Today, new highways, railways, and digital networks trace paths that echo those old routes. Trade and ideas flow faster than ever, but the mysteries, they linger. Archaeologists are still uncovering lost cities buried beneath deserts. Scientists are decoding ancient texts that reveal forgotten knowledge. And storytellers, just like us, keep passing down the legends. In Central Asia, some villages still honor rituals meant to protect travelers from desert spirits. In museums around the world, artifacts once thought lost remind us of how connected humanity has always been. Even now, the Silk Road teaches us something powerful, that every journey, whether across deserts or across cultures, carries stories we don't fully understand, that some places, some memories, never truly disappear. And maybe that's why the specters of the Silk Road still whisper in the wind. Because history is never really gone. It just waits, quiet, patient, until someone listens. So the next time you hear the phrase Silk Road, remember, it's not just a path through the past, it's a living thread woven into who we are. The Silk Road wasn't just about trade and culture. It was a stage for empires. Great powers fought for control of these routes, knowing that whoever controlled the Silk Road controlled wealth and influence. Caravans were taxed or robbed. The rise of the Mongol Empire in the 13th century briefly united much of the Silk Road under one rule. This brought an era known as the Pax Mongolicaf relative peace and unprecedented cultural exchange. Power wasn't just physical control, it was control over information, religion, and belief. By the 15th century, new sea routes were discovered. Ships could carry more goods, faster and cheaper. Its ghosts, the lost cities, the vanished travelers, the cursed relics remind us that progress can come with loss, and that every journey changes us, sometimes in ways we don't understand. So when you think of the Silk Road, don't just see it as a path of silk and spices. See it as a story of connection and mystery, of light and shadow, of legends written not just in books, but in the very dust beneath our feet. The Silk Road wasn't just about trade and culture, it was a stage for empires. The Black Death accelerated along these routes, devastating populations from Asia to Europe. The Silk Road may have ended, but its legends, they are forever. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next one. Bye for now.